Good morning, still good morning. My name is Rosie Goldsmith. I'm a journalist and I'm delighted to be back chairing a panel here at the Digital Minds Conference. In this session, we're getting down to business with four of the biggest names in the business. That is the business of creating, predicting, analysing and employing publishing models and trends. In publishing, we've heard a few already. We're going to hear from the horse's mouths, so to speak. What are the trends to watch? How should you act on them? What are the cutting-edge innovation and creative business models being offered up by the industry visionaries? Our four panelists are indeed those visionaries. They come from a variety of professional backgrounds. Maybe that is the key. And they've all landed their spaceships here on Planet Publishing. We Earthlings should now sort of sit up and listen. They're quite far away from me. I'm going to join them in a minute, but I think you can actually see me better here. That's why I'm going to introduce them from here. Mellissa Norman is the one closest to me over there. Mel is more or less a one-woman show of media source. She's a digital business consultant with 2 decades of experience in film, TV and digital, and before that as a sales and business consultant for clients including N-Power, Business in the Community, and many more. In her digital and social strategy work, she's helped several companies, including the BBC, my alma mater, UNESCO, Royal Shakespeare Company, and Tyneside Cinema, in other words, big and small companies. Mel works in what I would call social and collaborative ways. Her approach is, and I quote, to put people at the heart of an organisation and to integrate the latest technology, not just the content or product, but across the whole business. Now, Rebecca Smart, who is over there, is the managing director of a very successful 50-year-old publishing house with truly modern ideas, the Osprey Group, which today has 4 imprints or divisions: Osprey, Shire, Angry Robot, and Watkins. Osprey is based here in the UK, but looks out, and its USP is not what it creates, but for whom it creates. Now that, I hope, will be explained. And Rebecca always says we're all about creating communities of readers, and community is a word I think we'll be hearing quite a lot from our panel. Digital is now just another way we deliver what our readers want. Richard Nash, and this word community will come up again with Richard, I hope. When I lived in the USA, I used to read a magazine called The Utney Reader, a brilliant, brilliant digest of independent ideas. And for the sake of BBC Balance, of course, I have to point out that I also read The Nation, The Atlantic Monthly, and Vanity Fair, and so on. But The Utney is unique for me. So when I heard that Richard Nash was named one of Utney's 50 visionaries changing your world, of course, I pricked up my ears. He's an Utney guru. Richard Nash is an editor and publisher. His books have been on bestseller lists around the world. He has been VP of companies with new ideas and distinctive names such as the startup Small Demons, Soft Skull Press, Red Lemonade, and Cursor. And this idea of community, as I say, is something we will discuss. Now, these may seem like long intros, but it does mean that we can get all this over with. You know who they are, you know the kinds of questions that we can ask them. And then finally, we have Eloy Sasot, and so you don't think we've gone completely independent and hippie-ish. We do indeed have a representative from the corporate world. And anyway, are the boundaries so distinct these days? Eloy is Director of Pricing at HarperCollins. He's Spanish, a data analyst. He's worked across continents and across business and banking. He came from American Express and is what Victoria Barnes of HarperCollins, who was on my panel last year, calls her secret weapon. Right, now I'm going to rush over there and I'm going to start with Eloy, hopefully not wasting any time. Eloy, at the end there, is it possible to isolate one defining business model in a company as large as HarperCollins?
Wow. Hello, good morning. Not really, because we see ourselves as essentially as an author service provider, so provide service to the authors and then deliver it to retailers and consumers. So, and we trade many different types of content, and then you need to adapt yourself to the change and also to the type of content and geographies and also the regulations that you have in each of different.
So what do you exactly do?
Huh?
Your job?
My job. Wow, my job is trying to balance all what is going on and trying to deliver the right value to the authors while at the same time maintaining a fair price for consumers. And that's balancing different business models at the same time, depending on which format you are selling to.
Have you developed your own business model, or is this something that was in place when you came to HarperCollins?
Again, it depends what we mean by business model, because business model could be divided in 3 different stages. The value that you create as a publisher, and I think it was very well described by Robert previously. Then how you deliver that value. Do you deliver directly to the consumer? Do you go through retailer? We're also selling to schools, to churches, etc. And then how you monetize that value. That's probably where we were talking about here, how this business model in terms of monetization, right? And then you have different models living together currently, and you have a more traditional, what we call reseller or wholesaler model in print. And then we have been working with agency and that we can price directly to consumers. And that's where we're trying to understand and really have the good balance between value to authors and fair price to consumers. And why do we need to have this fair balance and have a say in how this balance is established? We believe that is essential because coming back to the beginning of service to authors, we need to be very aligned on what the author clearly makes art, right? And then aligning that piece of art and how it goes into the value into the consumers is crucial. And if you don't have that say of how then you are aligned with the authors, then as the industry is changing a lot, and we can then really discuss more in different areas, it can really lead into a lot of volatility and changes that can then be quite damaging for the industry as a whole, not publishing, but also the value chain. And that links into what we were discussing before, that Robert was discussing about the publishing, about the music industry, right? Sorry, I'm still diverging a little bit, but there's a lot of things that... Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned the word author too. We must always remember the author. Now, Mel, I want to talk to you first of all, because you've developed over a number of different businesses, you've developed a number of different strategies, and whatever we call them, strategies, business models, or whatever. And you've also learnt quite a few mistakes, or you've learnt from their mistakes. Tell us what you've learnt.
I think a couple of things I've learned. I've worked for many years in film and TV, and exactly the same as the music industry, it's undergone quite a lot of change. In the late 90s, I worked on one of the first digital feature films with a digital camera, and that just changed everything. And it's sort of been continually changing for me as I've been working within those industries and then moving into digital and social. Some of the key things I think I've learned and some mistakes is that companies, and this is part of what makes a business, but put revenue first before actually what Eloy mentioned, a keyword of value for customers. So when you think of a business model, so many people don't actually know what those terms mean. It's beyond a revenue stream, it's the channel that you deliver it. It's the partnerships that you have actually to do your business. And according to that wonderful, great source, Wikipedia, it's a way a business actually captures, delivers value. So some key things I've seen is companies are focusing much more on revenue. So in other industries, when there has been a lot of change, like here in the publishing industry, it's one thing to go, right, going from buying product to looking at subscription models, and that's one way of looking at it. And then what people are doing is they're looking outside, but they're not looking within their organisation. So depending on what kind of publisher you are, that might be a really good way for you to go. But actually, if you look at what is the value proposition for your audience, so even if you're a B2B business, the end customer, and I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes.
But can you really apply what you've learned in music and TV and so on to publishing? I mean, do you see it as a direct link?
I think there is a link. Yes, there are differences, but I work across all different sectors. And even last week, I was working with the high-value manufacturing sector, which, frankly, I don't know very much about. But what I do know about is I know about business and I know digital. And I think what's really, really key is there are many trends. So IBM did a survey, and 75% of companies they surveyed around the world across lots of different sectors are actually putting collaboration at the heart of their business now. That's actually a key trend. Publishing is different from other sectors, but you know your sector very well. As the previous speaker said, consultants come in and they think they know best. I think what actually is needed now is publishers actually working with people to reinvent their business model from the inside and create a playbook.
Richard, it's all sounding rather cosy, isn't it? I mean, do you think we're going back to sort of a little bit more touchy-feely kind of contact readers, authors? Do you even need a business strategy?
I mean, from a very, very big picture standpoint, I would argue that what is happening is the end of the Industrial Revolution era of media, which was a period when analog reproduction of media converted what was a bunch of people telling stories around a fireside into an elongated industrial supply chain. And as the need for an elongated industrial supply chain drifts away, then the status quo ante, the more tribal mode of social organization becomes more visible and becomes a likelier location within which a value can be certainly captured, probably also created and distributed, to use the sort of the tripartite way of describing value that we've kind of done on the panel so far.
And for startups, though, I mean, you've been involved with startups most.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with a startup, and the thing with a startup, and the thing with a startup in relation to a business model is startups do not have business models, almost by definition. And I know it's sort of a great way to make fun of a startup. Oh, they've no way of making money. What a silly bunch of fools. But the reality is that a startup is a very intentional act. An excellent entrepreneur and teacher at the School of Business at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley in California, Steve Blank, says that a startup is an organization formed in order to search for a business model, which is a level of experimentation that shouldn't be that strange to publishers, since effectively that's what authors do. They sit down and they go in search of a story. And that is precisely what startups do. They seek to figure out, if I start with a blank page, how do I create? As a result of which also there is going to be a tremendous amount of failure. The selection process that Robert described earlier, we're going to make 10 bets, 8 of which will fail, 1 of which will produce 10x return, is precisely the same business model that drives venture capital. We need one company that will make us 10 times the money we put into it in exchange for the other companies that lose us all our money. And so startups are companies that participate in that search for a new business model. The company I'm at, Small Demons, is a company that indexes books for all the cultural references in them and connects them up together. References to people, whether pop culture, celebrities, historical personages, characters, places from Buckingham Palace to Central Park to the Electric Ballroom, or things, food, drink, guns, drugs, cars, all those. And that basically constitutes a data layer. And if there's one thing, if there's a couple of things we see on the internet, one key aspect, one key sort of metaphor that is used in understanding the internet is the layer. If you think of the publishing value chain as a pie where it gets sliced up, the one metaphor used for the internet is the layer cake as opposed to the pie. And the layer cake involves, say, the search layer, the geolocation layer, all that data that Foursquare uses. And what we're interested in being is the narrative layer, all the details of all the stories ever told.
Rebecca, Osprey has done incredibly well, is doing very well indeed. What do you put this down to, and keeping it to the business model?
Well, I think it's really interesting hearing, first of all, hearing about HarperCollins seeing themselves as a service provider to authors, and then hearing Richard talking about tribes, because we fit right in that. We are about the customer. And we believe that if you appeal to the customer and make yourselves a platform for customers to come back time and time again, that then makes you a platform that attracts authors.
Who is the customer?
The customer is different depending on the market that we're reaching. So we have, the company began as a military history publisher, and having grown it successfully for a number of years, it plateaued, and we looked around for what else we could do to grow the business further, and realised that we're good at serving the needs of an enthusiast customer. So what we've done is to do the same in other markets. So, for example, Angry Robot, which is a science fiction imprint, we do subscriptions. You can buy all our ebooks for a reduced amount on a monthly basis. And very much there, it's about the authors being part of the gang with the readers. So the authors are very good, not just at promoting themselves, but promoting each other and the brand. They love being published by Angry Robot. So it's all focused on the consumer, which has allowed us to try different business models, such as subscription, which we also do on our military history. And there's a lot of direct-to-consumer sales. We've run consumer events, particularly on the military history side in the US. And then on the military history side as well, we've used our relationship with our customers to help us find new areas in which to publish. Because what they know is the areas which are very, very niche, but where there is nothing else published.
Now, you do illustrated books, and we heard previously that illustrated not doing particularly well with digital. I mean, how are you getting over that particular problem? What kind of model do you have there?
The illustrations in most of our military history books are there for information, not to make the book look beautiful. And therefore, for us, selling illustrated ebooks is no different. From the customer's point of view, it's the information that they really want. So I think the phrase illustrated books means many different things.
Do you all believe that the models that you create for, say, corporate can also apply to independent? Is there one size fits all, or does it really have to be so tailored in the way that you're doing for Osprey? I mean, do pitch in, any of you.
I think there is no single model that suits any, there is no silver bullet. Everybody's got to find their own way through.
There must be things that we can agree on that do work.
I mean, I would throw out there, I mean, if you asked, well, there would have been no job title at HarperCollins that you could have occupied 15 years ago, Eloy, but if you had asked anybody at HarperCollins 15 years ago what your business model is, there's not a chance in hell they would have said we're in the author services business. Now, there would be a certain moment at which, if you had a conversation with people, and that's not to isolate HarperCollins in any way. I mean, there's not an indie press or corporate publisher that would have said they were in the author services business. They conceived of themselves as being in the business of creating products that were then retailed rather than a provider of services. And that's a significant cognitive shift. And quite a powerful. Now, one of the services is to create products which are then sold at retailers, but it's one amongst many, and you're starting to see other productizations, Faber Academy, the speakers bureaus, events, varying ways to capture all that value under the demand curve that Robert was hinting at, value that might be at $2 or value that could be at $500. Or pounds, euro, what have you. And one of the ways in which those services can be offered is the way in which you offer authors the ability to reach that enthusiast community and sort of recognize a kind of a continuum of enthusiasm, the most intense of which is actually the writer's enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Mel, you've actually come up with this idea of 3 tools, which you've spoken about several, you've written about as well. Tell us about your 3 tools in your business model.
I don't know if there's 3 tools, but
well, at least
this last year I've acted as a theme champion for business models and growth for the creative industries, which is a really long, silly title. But what it meant is we could actually look at the creative industries as a whole and actually figure out, sort of like what are the current trends across the creative industries, and there are many. I think publishing can learn from other organisations. One thing that we've been looking at is something called business model innovation. I don't know, does anyone stick your hand up if you've heard of it before, business model innovation? Yes, thanks, Charles, at the back.
So you're innovating business models? Yeah, so basically,
the current sort of thought around it is you can deal with digital and you can deal with social. That's one hurdle or 2 hurdles. But what happens next? What happens when something else comes along after that? How can you change a company, and how can you actually create something which still delivers value? And I think that's where business model innovation comes. And it's quite a new science, but it's used across lots and lots of different industries. And it's about actually taking sort of 9 building blocks of a business model and then being actually use it, and then using design thinking in order to map your current business model and then to change your business model and to look at it across different ways and by employing different strategies. And it's something that I've been using very successfully with a lot of organisations at the moment. And it's a way of thinking about things differently. As I said, digital and social, you can deal with this now, that's great, but in 3 to 5 years' time, we're going to be having a different conversation. Maybe it'll be about holographic entertainment, or it will be about something else. So you can actually just follow everybody else and be a sheep, and try and figure out what's the next best thing, or you can go, okay, these are the trends, we're looking at these, and actually figure out what do our customers value, and to start building your business model from there. If you can figure out what is valuable to your customer, and if it's no longer scarcity, then it must be a must-have, or it must be something to do with value, or another one of the components. And if you can figure that out, then you can actually redesign and develop your business model from that point.
That's the idea, is it? I mean, it's an old-fashioned idea again. What is the core value of the business?
I mean, one of the challenges, and it faces a variety of both media companies and various companies, even like mine, that operate around the periphery of the media businesses, is the question of bundling. And in some ways, it feels like that is really what the next 3, 5, 10 years is going to be about in the media industries, is determining what are the appropriate bundles that companies should be doing. The cable companies in the United States struggle with that. We've got 500 channels we can deliver. What model do we deliver them under? What are the various tiers of service? How do we deal with the fact that the sports channels will extract enormous sums of money? The LA Dodgers alone got $9 billion out of Time Warner Cable for the rights to broadcast baseball games for the next 20 years.
And how do you do that in publishing then?
And so, I mean, that's going to be the question, and in a certain sense, you guys represent 2 different approaches to bundling. Your focus is on a full set of passion services, of enthusiast services around a set of communities that you are very carefully selecting. You've kind of been endowed with a vast array of disparate communities, but have incredibly sophisticated infrastructure for delivering to them that could be bundled in any number of different ways, whether it's providing distribution services to small editorial operations or the various different possible aggregations that a
Rebecca, what is your bundle then? I mean,
well, we've done some e-book bundling actually on the fiction side, but I think what Richard's more talking about is seeing content grouped in different ways. And what we do is have customers who see our content as bundles, even if they're not necessarily buying it as bundles. It's a bundle of stuff under a brand, which has certain values attached to it.
So you see yourself as a brand, primarily?
We have a number of brands which are recognised within their niche communities.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's the brand you're talking about.
Yes.
Because I mean, people have to know what Osprey is about, otherwise they wouldn't buy Osprey books.
Yes, and if you ask anyone who has even a passing interest in military history, they will have heard of Osprey.
With HarperCollins then, and as head of pricing, I mean, your main business model has got to be about how to keep books, how to discount them, how to compete with Amazon. I mean, how do you develop that kind of model?
We do it by really understanding how it all fits together. How it all fits together. You don't need to consider things in isolation. So you need to understand the internal economics. Okay.
I mean, within HarperCollins, how
No,
it all fits together?
No, how it, in the
industry.
whole value chain, not even only the publishing industry, the whole value chain. Okay. What is the role of each of the players in the value chain? Okay. How are the products evolving? What is the product development? The perception of value, and I cannot enhance it even more than the notion of value. And then also the market. How's the competition moving? How are the retailers behaving?
And you can react very quickly to the market now, because I mean, you're getting figures immediately.
Yes, but at the same time, it is very complicated and very complex, and we need to be very careful in how we do certain things. So there's also the notion of understanding the short and the long term, and being responsible about the long term while also acting in the short term, and that's why there's a lot of choices that you need to balance.
One of the challenges of innovating within the publishing industry is the lack of speed and the amount of complexity in the chain.
You still feel that today?
Absolutely, yeah. There was an article, I think Richard Charkin from Bloomsbury used exactly those words, too little speed, too much complexity. You know, still being driven by chain retailers, particularly in the US, you're having to have material ready to sell content 18 months ahead. And that makes innovation really difficult.
Mel, what do you feel about that? Because, I mean, you've actually been developing a strategy for... You've written a book, a manuscript about developing a strategy for book business, is that right?
No, I'm actually a wannabe author.
You're a wannabe author, right. Yeah. Well, you're on the right panel. Tell us about your own business strategy, then.
I mean, I think it's really hard. I mean, you know...
as an author,
I think it is really, really challenging because, you know, the world is changing. I think authors, and it's really nice to hear Eloy say, I think authors have an interesting position within that. They have to be good at marketing if they're going to succeed. They have to be good at doing social media. And they have to be good at working with a publisher where an author may know a little bit more about a particular area because they are, you know, they are the fans. They maybe they've created something which is just, you know, quite niche, and their ability to maybe help the publisher with that.
So you still want a publisher as an author?
Yeah, absolutely.
You definitely want a publisher.
Absolutely. I think there's lots of benefits of that, and actually building on something that you mentioned a minute ago about complexity. I don't know if anyone knows how Zara's business model going into fashion, how Zara's business model works. It's very, very similar. Fashion is very similar because, you know, there is a pipeline and there is a length of time it takes to actually get something to the customer. And how Zara have been doing it is that they're actually cutting down the time it takes by actually changing the way they actually do business. Their resources and their activities so that they can actually get something on the market, on the shelf within weeks rather than months. It's doing things very, very differently, and it's looking at it in a completely different way. But actually, what they're doing is they've taken the people on the ground in the shops who are actually selling the product, and they're figuring out, oh, you know, there seems to be a trend in this area, and they're feeding it back. It's not a one-way conversation. So it's not a broadcast. It's actually a two-way conversation. And I think publishing can learn from other industries.
I mean,
what they have is control of the whole chain.
They do have the control of the chain.
And fashion is also creative. Let's not forget the creative side.
But the other thing with fashion is that it is a creative industry that is not protected by copyright. And one of the reasons they have that speed is because they have to have that speed.
Would you do away with copyright?
I mean, I think copyright is being done away with. Copyright is sort of going to eventually fade over a couple of decades in the same ways as laws against, you know, letting your horse poop in the street fade into irrelevance. You know, there's no way it'll disappear in any legislative way because there's too many people who wouldn't want that to happen, but it will diminish in relevance. If we're in the services business, then the ability to have a monopoly over the reproduction of a thing starts to drift away, and you start finding other locations, unhackable locations in which you can. I mean, it's not cost effective for a person to print their own book. It's not cost effective for a person to hack an entire website and replicate it so that they can have a military history forum that is the same as your military history forum. So we'll find more and more and more ways to create, deliver, and capture value that aren't based on the underlying copyright monopoly, and all of a sudden we won't notice that we didn't need
Rebecca,
it.
if you think about what Neil was saying earlier, I think that's a perfect illustration of that, the dandelion and different
that
ways.
That dandelion's going to travel today, isn't it?
Different ways to extract value and unexpected ways.
And can I just mention, actually, just based on what you were saying about the fashion industry, yes, the fashion industry is different and it doesn't, they have more control of the value chain. But looking at what's been happening with film and TV, partnerships has been key. I mean, in film and TV, there are lots of different partners who do different things. There are people who have been distributing their own content online for many years. It's very, very similar. But what they had to learn is by actually working together. There is a tendency when you're working within business to be just purely competitive. And I think that there is an underlying level of sharing that will actually help the whole industry, or looking at ways of becoming more agile that will benefit everyone.
The romantic idea of sharing.
That's the hippie in me. But,
yeah. I know that we were running over, we started late. We won't be able to have questions, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll be able to talk over lunch. We'll just continue for another 5 minutes or so. And with a few quick Q&As. If you just want to keep going, then I just want to ask a few quick questions.
Can I just build a little bit deeper on the notion of speed that you raised, because I think it's a very crucial one. As now I think it's not just everything is changing, that's always, all the time, but now it's the speed of change that is really very, very dramatic. And
I think we all agree, don't we?
Yeah, and how we adapt into that, because complexity is also growing, complexity and speed, and then how you navigate through that change. And that's the biggest challenge, that's why everyone's pretty much saying, I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, right? So what do you do? How do you then behave? And linking in all, understanding what is your position in the value chain, also understanding how things are changing. And for that, what do you need? You need experimentation. You need to try different things. And for that, you need the data to analyze.
Is there time to experiment, though? Do you think publishing has that time? Because we were saying how slow everything is.
It depends how you do the experiments. I was reading this weekend a book on data jiu-jitsu. So it depends just by doing a little experiments, you can then leverage much more. So experiment a little bit, learn, scale. And then how you do these different stages, it really makes a big difference of success or failure.
Rebecca, how do you think you can measure the success of these models? I mean, we've had 5 years of the digital conference. We've got people talk about in 5 years' time, as though that's a good chunk of time. But I mean, is it bestseller lists? Is it market share? Is it cultural influence, legacy? How do you measure the success of a business model?
Well, ultimately, unless you're very rich, independently wealthy, you have to be able to make money out of it. It has to make profit and cash eventually. Of course, there are lots of other things. Culturally, we have to find a way to keep authors able to write professionally.
Without
that can only happen if the businesses
by the pressure
work.
Of business. I mean, authors are overwhelmed by the pressure of having to keep up with social media and with business and so on.
Yes, which is why people like you do still want a publisher.
Yes, absolutely. Richard, what would you sort of final?
I mean, the thing is that one of the classic things that are said about startups is you have to fail fast and fail cheap.
Have you failed a lot?
Oh yeah.
Is that the key?
I mean, I had a previous startup called Cursor that failed, and I gave a 20-minute speech about how and why we failed. I got, not to pat myself on the back, but I'm going to say that people patted me on the back for doing that. At a conference like this in San Francisco, I described the failure of my startup because it was something people were used to in the world of startups. It wasn't something people were used to in the world of publishing, to go up and explain at great length how you fucked up. And fucked up at the level of a business, not just, I did this one bad book, we all have bad books. But this was at business level. So you have to fail, and it's going to be hard. Publishing, the natural life cycle of a book is going to be years. So the locations in which we have to fail fast and cheap aren't going to be around title selection. We have to find other aspects of our business within which to fail fast and fail cheap.
Cycles are changing too, so that's the cycles are changing too. But I agree.
And Rebecca, how resistant are people, say within your own company, to change? I mean, this is the other thing too. You're taking this whole company. You're all taking companies, business, people with you. Are people going along with this?
Yes, naturally people resist change because change is going into the unknown. We all like what we know, but it's about making it the new known and helping people find their own known, if you like. So we have very small teams. The teams are very much focused on the customer so that there is that constant dialogue with the customer. We use coaching within the business. We find the champions for any new project and push those people as hard as we can. There are lots of ways. Fundamentally, it's about really, really good communication. So one of my mantras is say the difficult things. If there's something in the back of your mind that you think, oh, this is going to be difficult, that's the thing you say first.
Just a very, very quick thought based on what you said. That's probably the location where the experimentation needs to happen, because the cycle of engagement with an author needs to have a certain amount of space. The cycle of engagement with the reader, and this may in many ways be the most important aspect of quote-unquote direct-to-consumer, is that it forces you as a company to have a highly iterated set of relationships with your consumers over and over and over again, and that can happen in cycles of minutes, hours, and days, as opposed to the cycle of 9 months or 18 months that would be going on with the author.
And I think I know the answer to this, but you're not obviously not just focusing on big names too, because I mean you certainly don't. I mean it's not just about the megastars.
No,
it's about
not everyone can have megastars.
Indeed.
Just wanted to sort of make one final point on that. We did a round table recently with people from the publishing industry, veterans of the music industry and others. And John Kingsby from Nesta made a really, really good point and said that business models was a verb, not a noun. And it was something that it is an iterative process.
To business model?
A business model is a verb, not a noun. So it's an iterative process. So it's something which you need to think about and do continuously, and that's where measurement and data and metadata comes into it. And I was on a business roundtable 2 years ago about the future of publishing, and data and metadata wasn't mentioned. It wasn't mentioned at all. So things have changed already, and I think it's just about that iterative process.
This is so hard, only half an hour to go through all this amazing material. I'm going to ask you just to end, if you could name one thing that you would really like to happen, and we're talking about business models and trends in the next 5 years. Why not 5 years? Keep to the 5 years. Eloy.
When I would like to
your absolute dream, yes. if the world were your oyster. Rebecca, I'll come back to you.
As a reader, I would love for the industry to find a way to do subscription with all books. As a publisher, and I know for agents that's much more difficult, but as a reader, that's what I'd like to happen.
You know, last year Victoria Miles spoke about self-publishing. We talked a lot about self-publishing. I mean, that's sort of, you know, gone quite quiet, well, a little bit quieter at the moment. What do you think about that? Is that something that you want to develop?
Of course, it's linked to what we're saying of service to authors, right? And really keeping the dialogue and seeing what is out there. And we love self-publishing because it really it kind of tests the viability of the piece of art that the authors create, and then we can then go and then build further value on the top of that.
Richard, in 5 years' time?
I would like to see over the next 5 years more failure. More instances of corporate publishers trying self-publishing services or unbundling their services to allow a far greater range of a la carte options for authors and entities depending on what they're doing. More community-driven stuff from independent presses, more self-consciousness around the provisionality of each of these things. I have absolutely no fucking clue where that will get us 5 years from now, but wherever it is, it will be better than where we are now.
Thank you. And Mel, finally.
Continuing on what Richard said, is actually for publishers to have a startup culture within their organisations, for them to become more agile and to incubate ideas so that they're trying things and they're testing things and they're failing things. And I think that is the future to get us beyond digital into whatever happens next.
Can I add?
You may.
Be quick. The notion of responsibility, right? The notion of responsibility. So we need to understand what are the consequences of our actions, that we can have in the value chain. We had the example of the 20p books this year, so we need to be very careful about...
no more 20p ebooks.
No more 20p.
We're going to have to finish it there. As you can tell, it's very frustrating. We're just getting going, but I think we've come up with some absolutely wonderful ideas. And as we heard earlier, the model for tomorrow is try everything and don't be afraid to fail. Thank you to Mel Norman, Rebecca Smart, Richard Nash, and Eloy Sasot. Thank you so much to all of you.